You're listening to a bonus episode of the Naked Mallrat podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Kolmanovsky. This show is about scientific discoveries and people behind them. I talk to a lot of great scientists for the podcast, but it's impossible to fit full conversations into the main episodes. So you can listen to them here in their original form. Please tap to rate and comment on us on Apple Podcasts. It's very important to us that people find out about this podcast. In 2005, the skull of a Homo erectus from almost 2 million years ago was found in Dmanisi, a town in southern Georgia. It was a discovery that changed our view of who we are and what we know about European evolution. Karen Baab, a professor at Midwestern University with a broad background in anthropology and human evolution, was there during the process of skull uncovering. We talked about what it was like, why this discovery is so significant, and how it changes the way we think about the human evolutionary history.
So I'm Karen Baab. I'm a professor at Midwestern University, which is basically a medical school. I teach anatomy here. But my background is in paleoanthropology, and I study human evolution, human fossils. My particular interest is human evolution over the past 2 million years ago or so. So a lot of work on Homo erectus and Homo floresiensis, which is that little kind of hobbit-like small species from Indonesia.
Fantastic. So have you ever been to Dmanisi?
I have. I spent a couple of years doing field work there, basically as a grunt, just digging and, enjoying the experience. Yeah.
What was it like?
At the time, it was very exciting. There were a lot of students there. There were a lot of really kind of professional bigwigs, important people coming through the site all the time. And it was one of my first experiences spending kind of a large period of time in another country. So it was a really enjoyable experience from that perspective. Yeah. And I made some lifelong friends doing that. So
fascinating. Can you remember of any particular highlight of that trip?
So actually, the last year I was there was the year that they started to uncover the most recent skull, the D4500 skull. It didn't come out of the ground entirely while I was there, but we could see it emerging, and we could see even then that it had a real robust look to it that we didn't see entirely in the other fossils. So knowing that was coming and not knowing how much of it there would be. So when I was there, it was just the very top part of the skull, and it wasn't clear how much of it was preserved. So, what I found out about it, I found out with everybody else when it got published. But knowing that I had been there for that kind of initial discovery was really exciting.
How did it feel? I mean, when you saw it, what did you think? What did you feel?
I guess you feel like you're there for something really once in a lifetime. Any human fossil is rare, and a well-preserved fossil is even rarer. Little bits and pieces are not uncommon, but something really, and you could see even then that it was pretty complete, and it was something different. So you knew it was going to change the story a little bit. And so being there for that initial moment is just something really unique, and you're not going to experience that again. Maybe people at that site who are there all the time get to do that, but I was a student, I kind of came and went. So for me, that was a really unique moment.
Didn't you want to touch it?
No. I did not
Why?
I did not want to damage that. I did not want to have the responsibility, I think.
Not even feel it with your skin?
I have had the opportunity to hold and touch lots of fossils, but for me, knowing that they are already out of the ground, they are stabilized, other people have, had that initial experience is okay. For me, there's a certain fear, that is, like I said, it's a once in a lifetime, incredibly rare fossil. Like, I just didn't want the responsibility of having to be the one that could damage it. And like I said, I did get to see many other fossils in my lifetime, so I have had that also amazing experience, so.
Okay, so you said that there were many big wigs coming through that site. Why? How are these fossils special in your field?
So I've been thinking about this and, what is it that makes this site really special? And there's a couple things. I mean, I'm sure that these are essentially the oldest fossils outside of Africa. There are other archaeological sites with stone tools that may be as old or older in China. But in terms of actual human fossils, that's unique. But it's not just that. I think that it's the number of fossils. It's the preservation of the fossils. It's the amount of information that you can pull from that sample that is really unique. There are a few other sites maybe that have lots of fossils, but it's not very common. People who study humans want to know more than just what one fossil can tell you. They want to know what that population, that group looked like. And at Dmanisi, you have individuals that are young, not fully mature. You have individuals that are old and have lost all their teeth. We have skulls. We have bones from the skeleton. We have thousands of tools. We have so much wealth of information. And it's in a well-dated site. It was removed from the site in a controlled scientific way. So we have all of that context. And that is just an incredibly rare confluence of events. So that's part of it. And part of it is just that I think it fundamentally rewrote at least one chapter of the human sort of evolutionary story.
How so? I mean, everybody keeps mentioning that they are the oldest.
Right.
Why should we care? Why does it matter?
Right.
How does it change our view of history?
So if we go back in time, not all the way back to Dmanisi, but if we go back to the 1800s, initially all we knew about human evolution was what came from Europe. These big brained Neanderthals and things like this. And then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you start getting these glimmers of fossils from outside of Africa, from Indonesia at the Trinil site with Eugene Dubois' discoveries of what eventually became the type specimen for Homo erectus. And then you have people like Raymond Dart working in South Africa, and you have these little ape-like fossils, but they weren't really taken seriously. They weren't fully integrated into that human evolution story. It was a very Eurocentric, European kind of vision of evolution. And then we start getting more and more fossils in South Africa and other places. And eventually the view shifts. And now Africa becomes the kind of cradle of mankind. And I think that's reasonable. I mean, certainly the oldest, longest record of human evolution and all the most primitive fossils are in Africa. But now you have this kind of division where you have all these big-brained European fossils and these primitive African fossils. Dmanisi is really the first fossil, I think, that kind of brought some of that more early, more primitive morphology into Europe and suggested that Europe was actually much more diverse in terms of the hominins that it has harbored over the years, over the millions of years. So I think it changed our view a little bit of what European evolution looked like. It wasn't just these really big-brained, cold-adapted groups. We have these rather small-brained, much more primitive, technologically hominins living there at a much earlier time. It also positions Eurasia as a possible source population for other groups living in Europe, living in Asia, not just Africa as kind of the sole source for these early hominins, but maybe even evolution from Eurasia back into Africa. That remains now a much more feasible possibility than it was before the discoveries in Georgia.
So let's try and unpack this a little bit. So originally, this naked bipedal ape was only supposed to be capable of leaving Africa once the technology was quite advanced.
Right.
Because the world outside was so hostile, wasn't it?
So it seems to me that there was a kind of a moment where there was these very complex webs being proposed for why hominins dispersed and left Africa, which we should, of course, remember that there was no concept of an African continent and these sort of political divisions that we kind of map onto this now. But still, there was a sense that, outside of Africa, further north, you have a much more temperate climate, more seasonal, and that's more challenging for an animal to maybe navigate, that kind of climate. And so you're right. There were ideas that in order to make these big dispersals, you might need really complex technology. So Homo erectus is the first group associated with these Acheulean tools, these bifacial tools, which implies not just more technological innovation, but maybe more cognitive capabilities. But also, there was an idea that you needed big bodies, big brains, this kind of much more meat in the diet. So a whole web of factors, many of which I think the Dmanisi fossils have called into question. They are not particularly big-brained. They are only maybe a small bit larger, if any, than the preceding species. Their bodies aren't particularly big. Again, they overlap with the preceding more primitive Homo habilis group. Their stone tools are the same kind of tools you find at the earliest stone tool sites, essentially. So we don't see a big shift, a big change that would have maybe explained this dispersal. And so we need to look to other factors, or maybe just accept that this kind of dispersal didn't require a special adaptation.
So we need to imagine an almost chimpanzee-like creature in terms of brain capacity.
I think the brains are bigger than chimpanzees. The brains are bigger than chimpanzees, but they're not immensely bigger than Homo habilis that stayed in Africa. So then the question is kind of like, this anatomy, the brain size, the tools, it existed in Africa for a while before this dispersal. So it's not the explanation for the dispersal. So then why do we have that? Was there something about the climate? Was there something about population pressure, or were they following prey animals? I mean, there's a lot of other possible explanations, but I don't think we've kind of landed on a single good explanation for this.
So with a bigger brain, it would be easier, right?
That was the thinking. Then you have a more complex cognition, maybe an ability to kind of buffer yourself from changing environments and climates and new challenges using that cognitive capability. But we don't see big brains in Georgia. There's also an idea that maybe smaller teeth indicates a less mechanically difficult diet, maybe a higher quality diet with more meat and fat and other kind of high calorie but easy to chew foods. The Dmanisi hominins are interesting because some of them have smaller teeth, but like this most recent fossil, which is D4500, has pretty big teeth. It doesn't have that same signal. So again, it leaves some open questions about what the basic requirements are for dispersal.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Could you just, if you were to meet an alive Dmanisi erectus right there, could you describe her for us? I mean, what would she look like?
So she would be a bit shorter than us. Like I said, there is variation among the skulls. Some of them have larger faces, some of them have smaller faces, some of them have really large brow ridges. Some of them are a little smaller, but certainly you would see more development of that brow ridge over the eye. The forehead would be flatter. The jaws are probably proportionally bigger than what you see in modern humans. That's something that makes modern humans kind of different. We have this smaller, flatter face. And of course, like I mentioned, the brain behind that you wouldn't see that big round brain case that we have in humans. It would be a flatter forehead. Even the back of the skull is flatter and less kind of filled out. The chewing muscles are probably a bit bigger. But certainly walking on 2 feet, I don't think the limb proportions are significantly more ape-like, so they wouldn't have these long arms like you would see in a chimp. I don't expect they were wearing clothes, but they might have been using very simple stone tools, certainly butchering animals if you just kind of happened upon them in their day-to-day life.
Wow. So what I hear you say, it raises more questions than gives answers.
It raises a lot of questions, I think. It raises questions about capabilities of hominins dispersing. It raises questions about relationships among groups. As a species, did Homo erectus actually emerge in Africa? Or in fact, did it emerge in Eurasia? And then the later Homo erectus in Africa, was that a back migration? That's an open question now, which was not really on the table before Dmanisi. There's a lot of fossils that are farther east as well in this Homo erectus group. In China, in Indonesia, there's the Homo floresiensis group. How do they relate to Dmanisi? Again, more open questions. I think it does raise questions. And for a paleoanthropologist like myself, that's one of the most exciting things. Things are no longer set. There's more open questions, more things to think about and consider.
Amazing. I know at the times of Darwin, the idea that sapiens originated in Africa was not at all widespread. I think we should point to Darwin maybe as one of the biggest proponents. And then 20th century was all about that, all those African finds.
Right.
Can you imagine, without discussing the probability, can you imagine that a few decades from now, the origin of sapiens again would shift to outside Africa?
So Homo sapiens as a species, our own species, right now, the earliest fossils we have are in Africa. But like you're saying, that was the situation for Homo erectus, in 1990, right? Before the first fossil from Dmanisi. So I'm trying to imagine it. And my mind raises all the same arguments that I would have had against Dmanisi. Like, not only are the oldest fossils in Africa, but it seems to me that the fossils that would immediately precede that are also in Africa. But then again, that's exactly the same situation that we had. So I don't think we have the oldest modern humans. Based on genetic evidence, that record should extend deeper than what we have recorded. So I think we have to call that an open question. I think that there is a large area that remains to be explored, not just in Georgia, but east of Georgia as well. India is fairly represented in our fossil record currently. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, and something like Dmanisi makes you reconsider all of those assumptions.
So it seems like past is almost as unpredictable as future.
Yes, for sure.
Fascinating. Last question. What's your biggest dream for that field? I see you're really passionate about that. If you were to find any fossil you would want to, what would you like to find? Where would you dig?
Well, I would certainly not be adverse to going back to Georgia, but I don't know. That's a great question. I think I am. I've always been very interested in the relationship among groups, populations within Homo erectus, and dispersal, and we are really missing that record between Georgia and parts of China. So I think sort of east of Georgia, how did hominins migrate through that region? It could be south as well. I would love to pick up more of that signal of migration of early Homo erectus and maybe even later Homo erectus. This may be a situation where we have multiple waves. Surely there are regions where you might pick up different sites at different ages that tell you about different population movements. That would be really interesting to me. So I think Eurasia is an area of great potential. And I look forward to seeing
Amazing.
What comes next.
Since you've mentioned that, those Chinese tools, I think they were dated 2.4 million years ago, and they were found about 3 years ago, published at least 3 years ago. And back then, when they were published, there was quite a bit of dispute. Is there a consensus about these fossils now? Do most of people in the field take them seriously? At least, do they trust the dating and that these are human-made tools?
I think these are always tricky questions. My recollection is they were about 2.1 million years, but I'd have to double check that. I certainly have seen them cited. There's also been some tools from Jordan that are pretty old as well. I think that it's challenging when we have these individual sites without a lot of sort of supporting evidence. But I will also again point out that the dating at Georgia was questioned in the same way initially. So I think that's a common trend. But that's how science works too. We need to be able to repeat a result. We need to be able to evaluate it from multiple lines of evidence. So I think, any kind of new site that's like a single data point that sort of seems unexpected, there's going to be more scrutiny, and I think that's reasonable. But I also think that time and time again, these sites that have undergone this kind of scrutiny, they often stand up to that. Again, the Hobbit site in Indonesia had a lot of controversy when it first came out.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of ongoing work done. I do think that is now the consensus is that we have a new species there, that it is real, that...
And also the other one, the Florensis, and what's the other one?
The one that is the Luzonensis in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Those
These
are other sites like Dmanisi that were just unexpected and raised a lot of new questions. And so you have this pattern again and again. You get entrenched in your views, and then you get shaken out of them. And eventually the views change to absorb and, accommodate that new find. But there's a process that takes some time.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
This was a bonus episode of the Naked Mole Rat podcast by Libolibo Studio. I'm Ilya Kolmanovsky. Goodbye.